was rural, and half of the nation's towns and cities had fewer than 10,000 people. Up until that time, life on the farm was lonely, and farm families felt that they weren't keeping up with the urban population, which had electric lights, telephones, and access to the latest goods in department stores. Farm families were isolated, often with limited funds, and few could afford the time or the expense of shopping in the city. But all of this changed with the introduction of the mail order catalog. In 1872, a Chicago merchant named Montgomery Ward began sending copies of a catalog to thousands of farmers in the Midwest. The catalog was 280 pages long and offered farm families the opportunity to order any of the goods listed in it by mail. This is how Montgomery Ward and Company became the nation's first mail order company. Ward had discovered something entirely new and profitable, a new method of conducting business. After that, the terms mail order house and mail order catalog were added to our vocabulary. The most successful mail order house was Sears and Roebuck, which entered the mail order business in 1895. Just as Montgomery Ward had done with his catalog, Richard Sears advertised his products in catalogs that were sent to farm families. The Sears catalog sold food, clothing, machinery, tools, stoves, anything and everything a farm family might need. The mail order business spread rapidly, largely because of improvements in postal services. The post office established rural free delivery in 1902 and parcel post in 1913. These new services meant that catalogs and goods would be delivered directly to the farm, so farmers didn't have to drive several miles out of town to pick up packages. These new services greatly contributed to the success of mail order houses. Rural free delivery also had great benefit for farm families. Families that had previously been isolated could now receive newspapers, magazines, and mail order catalogs in their mailboxes. This contact with the outside world broke their isolation and changed the outlook of rural America. Thanks to the mail order houses of Montgomery Ward and Sears and Roebuck, no farm was too isolated to be aware of the latest clothing, furniture, farm equipment, music, and literature. The wide distribution of the Sears catalog had another interesting effect. The Sears catalog had a lot to do with the similarity of goods available nationwide. Of course, this was also due to the mass production of goods. Mass production techniques made it possible to create reasonable copies of, for example, high-priced clothing. The two factors working together, mass production and nationwide distribution, tended to minimize regional differences in clothing styles. This is why there was a general lack of class and regional distinction in American clothing. People believed that if clothing of the same design and brand was widely worn by many people, then this was a sign of its value. By 1910, both men and women could buy every article of clothing, ready-made, from mail-order catalogs like Sears. Sears didn't pretend to be a leader in fashion, but it did try to provide what average Americans wanted. Women wanted to dress more fashionably, and they welcomed new styles. For farm women, the pictures of the smiling women on the pages of the Sears catalog were as close as they came to outside contacts during the long winter months. And for immigrants who wanted to become Americans, the Sears catalog was a textbook. Here they learned how to dress, how to furnish their homes, and some catalogs even had recipes and menus for holiday dinners, how to cook American food.
Number 12. What is the Questions 18 through 22. Listen to part of a conversation between a student and her tutor.
There's something I've always wondered about. Okay, a glass of water is crystal clear. A bathtub full of water looks faintly blue, and the water in a swimming pool is light blue at the shallow end and a darker color blue at the deep end. Does water have a color? I mean, its own true color?
Believe it or not, it does.
Okay, then what is it?
It's blue like a piece of blue glass, and like glass, or any other relatively transparent substance, the thicker it is, the deeper the color. That's why a swimming pool is a darker blue at the deep end.
Okay, then what I learned as a kid was wrong. In grade school, I was taught that water doesn't have a color, that it's clear, and clear isn't a color. But my own eyes tell me otherwise. So, why is this? I mean, why is water blue like blue glass?
It's because water transmits light of every color, but it's clearest for colors with shorter wavelengths. That's why its peak transparency is in the blue-green part of the light spectrum.
That explains why most of the time it looks blue or green.
Well, there are actually lots of factors that affect the color of water.
Such as what? Like how deep the water is?
Right, and it's easy to see why. It's because light from water comes from three places: the top, the middle, and the bottom of the water.
I'm not sure I understand.
Think of it like this. Together, all three parts of the water, top, middle, and bottom, make up the blend of light that we see. Under certain circumstances, one may dominate the others. For example, in shallow water, light from the bottom is most important. In deep water, very little light comes from below, so reflections from the surface are the brightest.
So that means in a shallow puddle, the bottom is well lit, so it sort of contributes more to the scene. I mean, it affects the overall color more than, say, uh, the invisible bottom of the ocean.
Oh, that's right. Because a shallow puddle is relatively transparent, the water adds virtually no blue light of its own,
And muddy water looks brown
because the light is scattered, primarily from the suspended sediments near the surface. That's another factor that affects the color of water: sediments. Even the cleanest, purest mountain lake contains a lot of tiny particles that scatter light.
that's because mountain lakes have a lot of silt from the glaciers, right?
That's right. Lakes fed by glaciers get their colors from the fine, suspended silt in the water, and also from the reflected light of the sky. Glacier-fed streams are usually sort of milky blue, and hot springs are sometimes yellow because of the sulfur suspended in the water. Some water is green and some is brown, depending on the mineral content.
This is really interesting. I'm glad I asked you about this.
Number 18.
Number 18. いい問題だったね。
Questions 23 through 28. Listen to part of a lecture in a communications class.
Throughout most of human history, a society's culture was defined and communicated primarily through the family. Early cultures communicated their values and beliefs to their children by oral tradition, word of mouth. Parents and grandparents had the job of passing on the culture's history and traditions. The older members of the family were storytellers and historians, our cultural narrators. The cultural narrator was valued for his or her wisdom and experience. The cultural narrator helped to sustain the society through the preservation of vital cultural information. Until the mid-20th century, the family was the medium by which culture was passed along. Since the 1950s, however, the role of the cultural narrator has been taken over by television. What I mean is, the family storytellers have been replaced by television shows that tell us who we are, what we need, how we should speak, and what we should believe in. In the 60s and 70s, as television became more a part of North American life, several writers and philosophers began to study what was going on. One of the most creative minds to explore this issue was Marshall McLuhan. McLuhan studied English literature in his native Canada and in England, and then taught at several universities in the United States. As a Canadian scholar teaching in the US, McLuhan realized that he didn't understand his American students. He couldn't figure out their interests and values, why they spoke and acted and felt the way they did. So he set out to learn more about the values of his students by studying their popular culture, the movies, television shows, music, pastimes, all the things that young Americans pursued in their leisure time. McLuhan became convinced that electronic media played a significant role and that the media were responsible for the attitudes and values of his students. In fact, he went beyond his immediate interest in his own students to theorize that the media had prompted most of the social changes in Western culture. McLuhan's ideas soon made him the leading cultural critic and media theorist of his time. McLuhan's ideas gained attention worldwide. He wrote several books about the effect of media on human development, including this one, The Medium is the Message, which is the book you'll be reading next in this course. The Medium is the Message is McLuhan's most influential book. Although it was first published more than 30 years ago, it remains an important classic in the field of communications. It's a book and an idea that you'll come back to over and over again, and reading it will probably change your view of how we communicate. Why is it such an important book? Well, you've probably heard the expression, the medium is the message, because it's entered our vocabulary. What McLuhan meant by the statement was that how people learn, the medium, is more important than what they learn, the message. In other words, the method of communicating information has more influence on the public than the information itself. Communication is culture, and culture is communication. McLuhan didn't consider himself a critic of the media in the sense of condemning it. He wasn't interested in deciding whether television was good or bad. He just wanted people to understand how it affected them so they could make their own informed decisions about it. We're just beginning to understand the ways that the media have affected our culture. Sociologists, psychologists, media ecologists, people in a multitude of fields are trying to explain the relationships among media, values, and behavior. Is television good or bad for us? Does television cause human behavior or merely record it? This question is of particular interest to researchers who study the effects of television, especially television violence, on children's behavior. And now that television is starting to merge with other electronic media, like the internet, there are a growing number of issues and new questions calling for informed thinking about the relationship of the media to human development.
Number 23. According to the professor, how did children
In development.
Number 23.